At my family's dinner table, I was the invisible one, Lily Thompson, 32, the daughter they barely introduced, the one with some office job. My mother even laughed when Emma, my brother's fiancée, asked what I did. But then Emma casually picked up her phone and Googled my name, and everything changed. You won't believe what she found, or how fast the room went silent. Stick around. This is the moment they learned who I am. I grew up in Westlake, Ohio, a town where sidewalks were clean, hedges were trimmed, and families worked hard to make sure the outside world only saw perfection. Ours was no different. A two-story colonial with the seasonal wreaths and just the right shade of shutters. My mother, Susan, ran the household like a PR campaign. She had the smile of a woman always camera-ready and the ambition of someone who couldn't afford cracks in her image. And my father, Robert, gentle but distant, preferred not to stir the water, even if that meant letting things fester beneath the surface. Then there was James, my older brother, my parents' pride, the chosen one. From the moment he hit his first home run, they built him a pedestal and never let him step down. His room looked like a museum of success, trophies, ribbons, and framed certificates. He was the story my parents loved to tell. I, on the other hand, was the quiet paragraph no one read aloud. When I was 8, I wrote a story about a girl who could talk to animals. My teacher called it extraordinary. I ran home with the paper in hand, heart pounding. "Look what I made," I said. My mother didn't even pause. "That's nice, Lily, but James has a science fair today." She told me to leave it on the counter. I did. Days later, I found it under a pile of junk mail, coffee-stained and unread. That's how I learned who I was in our family, invisible. And over time, I stopped trying to be seen. I chose a university in New York for more than just its writing program. I needed distance, physical, emotional, spiritual, from the house where my name was rarely spoken with pride. Westlake, Ohio, had never been a place I could grow. It was a place I had to escape. Those 4 years in New York changed me. I bloomed in anonymity, away from the constant contrast of James's highlight reel. My professors saw me not as someone's daughter or someone's sister, but as Lily, the girl with a sharp pen and a quiet fire. A poem published here, a short story there, small victories I stacked like bricks, building the foundation of a life my parents would never bother to ask about. When I came home for breaks, I answered questions with calculated vagueness. "School is good," I'd say, even when I'd just landed a spot in a respected literary journal. I'd sit at the table, fork in hand, while my mother gushed about James's business school internship, and my father nodded proudly. "You're doing something with books, right, Lily?" they'd ask. I'd nod. It hurt less than the truth. After graduation, I told them I was staying in New York to pursue writing. My mother barely glanced up from her coffee. "New York's expensive," she said flatly. "You'll be back in 6 months." My father tried to soften the blow. "Writing is hard, sweetheart. We just don't want you to get hurt." They didn't know it, but I had been carrying that hurt for years. The life I built in New York was mine alone. My first apartment in Brooklyn had peeling paint, drafty windows, and 2 roommates who were just as broke and ambitious as I was. I worked the early shift at a coffee shop near Union Square and spent my afternoons canvassing the city with resumes and hope. Nights were for writing, always writing, at a rickety desk in the corner of my room, sometimes until sunrise. I taped every rejection letter to the wall, each one a step forward, proof I was trying. It took 8 months, but I finally landed a job as an editorial assistant at a small, reputable literary magazine. The pay barely covered my half of the rent, but the experience was priceless. I worked hard, I listened, I learned. And then I met Clara Montgomery. Clara was the kind of editor young writers feared and revered in equal measure. Her feedback was blunt, her standards were unforgiving, but when she told me I had a voice worth sharpening, I believed her. "If you want encouragement," she told me, "join a writing group. If you want to be published, listen to me." I listened, and I wrote. My first byline in a national journal felt surreal. I didn't call home. I knew better than to hope. More followed, small pieces, then larger ones, then inquiries from agents. By the time I finished my first manuscript, I had a network, a reputation, and a rhythm. I sold my debut to a respected indie publisher. It was a collection of short stories about fractured families and unspoken truths. It was, in a way, a letter I had written to the girl I used to be, the invisible daughter in the corner. The book, titled Beneath Silent Waters, didn't just sell. It spoke. The New York Times called it a stunning debut. Literary awards followed. My second novel hit the bestseller list 8 months after release. My name appeared on syllabi at NYU and Columbia. And still, when I flew home twice a year, I was just Lily, the girl with a vague job in publishing. "Are you still working at that little magazine?" my mother would ask, barely glancing up from the roast she was carving. "James just got another promotion. They might move him to Chicago." I'd smile politely. I wouldn't mention the book tour that took me to 12 cities. I wouldn't mention the film option, the interviews, or the award that sat on my bookshelf back in Brooklyn. I wasn't there to be recognized. I was there to keep the peace. The truth is, I kept going home because some part of me still hoped, not for an apology necessarily, but for a pause, a moment, a glance that said, "We see you now." That hope stayed small and bruised, but it stayed. So when James brought his fiancée Emma home for dinner, I did what I always did. I put on a nice dress, I practiced my small talk, I braced myself for invisibility. The dinner started predictably. James arrived like royalty. My mother kissed his cheek twice. My father poured himself a drink. I took my usual seat at the edge of the table, near the kitchen door. When Emma asked what I did, my mother laughed. "Oh, Lily? She has an office job in New York. Nothing exciting." Emma blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Really? Publishing, right?" "I think so," my mother said dismissively. "She's always liked books." I sat there, stunned. Years of work, of sweat and rejection and success, reduced to a chuckle over mashed potatoes. Emma, perhaps sensing the tension, pulled out her phone. "What's your full name, Lily? I'd love to look up your writing." I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to lie, to protect myself from what might come next. But I didn't. "Lily Thompson," I said quietly. She tapped, scrolled, and then her face changed. "Oh my God," she whispered. The room went quiet. "You're that Lily Thompson?" And in that moment, everything I'd tried to protect unraveled. The two lives I had kept so carefully apart collided over a casserole dish and a Google search. The room was suddenly too quiet, too bright. My parents stared at Emma, then at me, then back again. I didn't know what was about to happen. But I knew for the first time they were seeing me. Not as someone's sister, not as a girl with a vague job, but as Lily Thompson. And the silence that followed? It was louder than applause. My parents still lived in the same house where I learned to disappear. Every holiday return was a rehearsal in restraint, a polite smile, a nod at the old family photos, a reminder that while the walls hadn't changed, neither had the roles we were expected to play. That night was no different. Fresh hydrangeas lined the walkway, and new curtains fluttered behind the windows like they were part of a showroom. It was always like this when James came home, my mother's version of hospitality, perfectly pressed and performative. There was an unfamiliar BMW in the driveway. Emma's, no doubt. I didn't know her yet. James's latest fiancée. He'd had many, but apparently Emma was special. Special enough to make it to dinner. My father answered the door before I could knock. "Lily, you made it," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I returned the awkward hug and followed him through the foyer. The photo wall greeted me like a silent accusation. James at Yale, James on the beach, James with his first client. No Lily. Not a single frame. Inside the living room, my mother's laughter rang like a bell, high-pitched and hollow. She looked up and gave me the kind of smile people give to distant acquaintances. "Lily, finally. We were about to start without you." She didn't offer a hug, just a flick of her wrist in the direction of the couple on the sofa. James rose to greet me, warm and genuine as always. "Lily, meet Emma." Emma stood, elegant in a navy sweater dress, her handshake firm and her eyes kind. I've heard so much about you. James says you live in New York. I love that city." "All good things, I hope," I replied, though I wasn't sure what James might have said. My mother snorted softly, barely audible but unmistakable. Dinner was served on the good china. Roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, garlic mashed potatoes. James's favorites, of course. The table was carefully arranged, my father at one end, my mother at the other, James and Emma seated side by side, and me alone on the opposite end, like a guest at my own family's table. The conversation flowed like a river with only one direction, toward James. His work, his engagement, the country club wedding my mother was already planning in her head. I stayed quiet, offering nods and brief replies when asked. I knew the script by now. But Emma kept turning toward me. "James told me you work in publishing?" she asked with genuine curiosity. Before I could speak, my mother interrupted. "She does something with books," she said dismissively. "Nothing like James, of course. He just made partner, you know." "It's a publishing house," I said, trying to hold on to composure. "I work with authors." Emma smiled. "That must be fascinating. Any books we should know?" Again, my mother interjected. "She's always been a bookworm. We used to beg her to go outside." Then came the blow that stunned even me. She's just a nobody with some office job, my mother said, laughing. Not everyone can be as ambitious as James and Emma. The words sat heavy on the table. Even my father paused, fork mid-air. James looked down, embarrassed. And in the silence that followed, something shifted. Emma glanced at me, eyes narrowing in confusion. Then, under the table, she reached for her phone. My mother kept talking about venues and florists, oblivious, but Emma's expression began to change, from curiosity to confusion, then surprise. She looked at me again, slid her phone further beneath the table, scrolled, and stopped. In that moment, I felt it. The walls between the two versions of myself, Lily the invisible daughter and Lily the acclaimed writer, were starting to crack. And Emma had just found the truth, hiding in plain sight. The air shifted, the table felt too small, the room too bright. And for the first time in my life, someone at that table saw me. Not the version of me my mother had constructed. Not the ghost. But the woman I had become. And something told me everything was about to change. They kept talking as if I weren't there. My mother mused about napkin colors. James rattled off details about honeymoon destinations. My father nodded, his usual background hum of agreement. And Emma kept glancing at her phone beneath the table, her fingers flying across the screen like they were searching for something. Then, mid-sentence about cake flavors, Emma looked up, eyes wide and fixed on me. "I'm sorry," she said, cutting through my mother's monologue, "but I have to ask, Lily, are you Lily Thompson, the author?" It was as if someone had opened a window in the middle of winter. Silence. 4 pairs of eyes turned my way. Even my father's fork, suspended halfway to his mouth, seemed frozen in place. "What are you talking about?" my mother asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Emma held up her phone for all to see. I recognized the page immediately, my author bio from the Penguin Random House site. Lily Thompson, author of Beneath Silent Waters and The Weight of Unsaid Things, National Book Critics Circle Award, Penn/Faulkner Award. Her voice trailed off. "That's you, isn't it? The photo matches." I should have felt triumphant, I should have smiled, but my throat closed tight, my hands trembled beneath the table. This was the moment I had dreamed of, and dreaded, for years. James reached for the phone, his brow furrowed. "Holy shit," he murmured. "Willie, is this really you?" My father leaned closer, squinting. My mother snatched the phone. "There's been a mistake," she said too quickly. "It must be a different Lily Thompson." Emma shook her head. "There's no mistake." She kept scrolling. "She's compared to Joan Didion. Her debut is on the New York Times bestseller list. Oh, her novel was optioned by Paramount. It's becoming a movie." You could feel the shift in the room, like gravity pulling sideways. My mother's face drained of color. My father looked lost. James stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. And Emma, she was glowing with discovery. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" James asked, his voice a blend of admiration and confusion. "I did," I said quietly, but it felt like shouting. My mother frowned. "That's ridiculous. You never said anything. I told you when my first story got published. I called home, you said that's nice and started talking about James's new car." My father blinked, trying to remember. "I sent you copies of my book, signed. I included a note. It was just before Christmas 3 years ago." My mother's lips thinned. "I don't recall any books. You put the package in the guest room. It was still unopened when I visited that year." James looked away. My father looked down. My mother crossed her arms. Emma tried to soften the moment. "Your books are extraordinary, Lily. You capture the quiet pain of being unseen so beautifully, it almost felt familiar." That was the thing. They didn't even realize I'd been writing about them, about this exact table, this exact feeling, for years. Not out of revenge, but out of hunger. Hunger to be known. My father cleared his throat. "National Book Critics Circle Award. It was a big one." "One of the biggest," Emma said. My mother, still clinging to denial, scoffed. "If you're so successful, why don't you drive a better car?" Emma laughed. "I live in Park Slope. My apartment has an office. I take the subway because I like it, not because I can't afford something else." Emma turned her phone on again. "Here's a video of Lily at the Penn/Faulkner ceremony." My face stared back at me from her screen, lips moving, arms lifting an award. The surrealism of it all hit me like a wave. James whispered, "All this time, while you thought I was a nobody," I said, echoing my mother's earlier jab. The room tilted, the power shifted, my voice finally carried weight. My mother leaned forward. "Why would you hide something like this from us?" "I didn't," I said. "You just never listened." "That's not fair," she snapped. "We supported your little hobby." "Hobby?" I choked on the word. "I've won national awards. My work is in university courses. I'm not your child with a hobby. I'm a professional, and I've been trying to tell you for over a decade." My father's voice was quiet. "I didn't know it was that important." "How could you not?" I whispered. "You never once Googled my name? You never wondered what I was doing in New York all this time?" "Dramatic as always," my mother muttered. "No, just honest." My voice cracked. "Because every time I tried, you turned the conversation back to James. You've never made room for me to matter." James opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I didn't know you felt this way." "Would you have heard me if I told you?" I asked. My father looked down at Emma's phone again. "These reviews, they say you write about family pain. Is that how you see us?" I paused. The silence carried years of withheld breath. "You write fiction," I said, "but the emotion?" "Yes, the ache of not being seen, not being heard, that came from here, from this house." And just like that, the dinner became a reckoning. Emma tried to find grace in the wreckage. "Lily, your writing means something, your voice matters." My mother stared at her wineglass. My father had tears in his eyes. James just looked broken. And for once, I didn't feel small, I felt seen. I took a deep breath. "I see you as parents who had room for only one successful child," I said carefully, "and I wasn't that child. So I built a life and a career that didn't depend on your approval or even your awareness. And now, here we are." My mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I need to clear the dessert plates," she said, though no one had finished eating. "Sit down, Susan," my father said, his voice firmer than I'd heard it in years. "This is important." "What's important is that Lily has been harboring all these resentments for years," my mother snapped, "writing books about how terrible parents we are." "Mom," James interjected, "that's not what Lily said. And you did just call her a nobody less than an hour ago." My mother froze. Her hands clenched around the plates, as if holding on to something tangible might help steady her. "I never said you were terrible parents," I clarified. "But yes, I was hurt, repeatedly, and instead of confronting you, I channeled those feelings into my writing. That's what writers do. We transform our pain into stories. Stories that made you famous while making us look bad," she said bitterly. "No one knows those stories are about you," I said gently. "I never said they were autobiographical. If you see yourself in them, well, that's your conscience, not my words." A hush settled over the table. My mother stood motionless. My father stared down at the linen napkin in his lap. James looked at me like he was trying to reconcile the sister he thought he knew with the one sitting across from him now. Emma's fingers brushed the edge of her wineglass, as if unsure whether to speak or stay quiet. "I never wanted to have this conversation," I said finally, "but now that we're here, maybe it's time. I've built a life I'm proud of, a career that fulfills me. I did it without your support. That doesn't mean I resented James's success. There was always room for both of us. You just couldn't see that." My father took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "I don't know what to say, Lily. I'm sorry we missed so much." It was the first apology I'd ever heard him speak, and it was so unexpected, so raw, I nearly didn't trust it. My mother sat back down, slowly, like her legs no longer had the strength to hold her up. "Why didn't you make us understand?" she asked, but the edge was gone from her voice. She sounded lost. "That wasn't my job, Mom," I said. "It was yours. Parents are supposed to see their children, all of them, not just the one who fits their version of success." James reached across the table and took my hand. "I didn't see it either. I'm sorry." His touch was brief, but something unspoken passed between us. Recognition, maybe, or regret, or both. Emma cleared her throat. "Your books are beautiful, Lily. They've touched a lot of people. That's not just talent. That's bravery." For the first time that evening, I smiled. The rest of the night passed in fits and starts. Quiet conversation, awkward sips of wine, my mother pushing around chocolate mousse without eating. But something had shifted. The old patterns of dismissal, of silence, had cracked. I didn't know what would grow in their place, but I knew nothing would ever be quite the same. Later, in the living room, Emma and I sat on the sofa while the others drifted away. She leaned in and said softly, "I'm sorry if I caused trouble by Googling you." I shook my head. "You didn't cause it. You just turned on the light." We sat together for a few moments longer. When James told me he had a sister who lived in New York, I had a hunch. "But when your mom talked about you like you were invisible..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "You forced them to see me," I said, "and I think I needed that." That night I returned to my hotel feeling like I'd walked through fire, but on the other side of the blaze was something I hadn't expected. hope. A few days later, a package arrived. From Ohio. My parents' address. Inside were brand new copies of my books. Not the ones I'd sent them years ago, still unread, but fresh ones they'd ordered themselves. Tucked inside the first was a handwritten note from my father. Lily, I've read this twice, once to know the story, once to hear your voice. I'm sorry it took me so long to listen. Your words are beautiful. They matter. You matter. Love, Dad. I ran my fingers over the ink, the indentations in the paper. His words, his effort, his love, awkward and late, but real. James started calling regularly, not just for holiday updates, but for real conversations about my writing, my thoughts, my life. He asked, hesitantly at first, if I'd consider doing a reading at his engagement party. Just a short one, he said, something meaningful. I want people to know who my sister really is. When I hesitated, he added, you don't have to, but it would mean a lot to me. I agreed. At the engagement party, the backyard had been transformed. White string lights, soft music, and tables set with linen and crystal. At the center of it all, a small podium. Emma greeted me with a hug. We're so excited. My cousin teaches English. She assigned your book last semester. My mother approached with an awkward smile. You're at table 1, she said, with us. And I told the bartender to chill the champagne for after your reading. These were small things, but they meant everything. I stood behind the podium, heart pounding, and read a passage from my second novel, a scene about a woman confronting her past in front of the people who never saw her. As I read, I caught glimpses of my parents, their expressions unguarded, listening. When I finished, there was applause, loud and genuine. My mother wiped a tear, my father stood and hugged me. Later, as the party wound down, my mother pulled me aside. That was beautiful, she said. I never knew you could write like that. You never asked, I replied. She nodded. I'm asking now. Better late than never? I hesitated, then smiled. Better late than never. In the months that followed, things weren't perfect, but they were better. My mother called to ask when my next book was coming out. My father joined a book club featuring me. James invited me to co-host a family podcast episode about storytelling. I kept writing, kept showing up, kept hoping, because once the invisible daughter had been seen, there was no putting her back in the shadows. And somewhere in the quiet space between hurt and healing, I found the courage to keep going, not for their approval, not for their praise, but because my voice mattered. It always had. And now, finally, they were listening. If this story moved you, even just a little, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We tell real stories like Lily's, stories of quiet resilience, buried pain, and hard-won recognition. And if you've ever felt overlooked or silenced in your own family, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Your voice matters here. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply keep telling your story.